topic is identifying and narrowing the scope of collection.
Again, I think what you need to understand is what success looks like and how much you really need. You need to identify what the universe of available information is in these pre-planning meetings and be very tough when you go to your meet and confer conference. Tell your lawyers, tell your support personnel, tell your entire team, this is what can be done, this is what can't be done, and make sure you're well equipped going in there to understand who has what information. You can't obviously mislead anyone as to what you don't have or what you do have, but you can be very strong in having the information associated with the case when you go into the courtroom.
There are lots of different ways in which you can limit your scope of production, and I think I'll let some of the other people talk about some of those things. My big comment on this would be a way to reduce production costs would be preserve all the responsive data, but perhaps actually only collect and process a smaller subset of that. And that would be negotiated, suggesting that in the event that the opposing party finds some data that they do in fact think they need to pursue further, you have it preserved, you can go get it at that time, but it reduces upfront costs because you don't necessarily have to produce everything that may be of limited value and expensive.
Narrowing the scope here, I think there's several tools available to us now. I mean, there's a lot of different software packages out there that help us do that. Packages that help us use key terms when the data is being collected, narrow that down, to limit the date ranges, and also to remove certain file types. If you're familiar with NIST filtering, which is a collection of MD5 hash codes that will basically scan your data there, and any common system file that are contained in that database will automatically exclude those, so you're not including them in the collection. From what we've seen on a typical hard drive that's maybe 20 gig, probably 90 to 95% of that is junk and system files. So excluding that right from the beginning will save you a lot of a headache and cost. And then also just on the search side and on the collection side, on the review side, being able to call out the junk, it always seems like a big problem. I don't know about your email, but mine's pretty ugly. And I got stuff from ESPN.com and WallStreetJournal.com and stuff that if I was ever involved in litigation would probably cost my company quite a bit of money to get rid of. But there are some good tools out there that will help you eliminate a lot of that garbage right off the bat and get down to the meat of what you're looking for.
And I think the best point that was brought up was keywords. How many of you worked out a keyword list? Working with attorneys? Oh, isn't that fun? Oh my gosh. I'm telling you what, that's why I have a bottle of wine chilling in my refrigerator every night. When I go home, gosh, there's certain things that you know are going to cause you problems. So the biggest question you have to ask is it defensible? Because the attorneys will not confer about this kind of stuff and will not talk about keywords and culling and things that you want to know up front until they absolutely have to. Now, sometimes they do that as a strategy, and sometimes they do that because they just don't want to deal with it at that point in time. But the biggest way to limit a collection is if you can get agreement by counsel on keywords and dates. And then you really limit the volume. Usually, keywords, if you can come up with a good keyword list, the sample that I use as my rule of thumb is that it should cull the population so that only 30%, 30 to 35% will get through. If that's what you're getting, so you start with 100, use your keyword cull, down to 35 to 30, that's pretty good. If you go below that, you might have a little too much in there. If you go above it, it's way too broad, it's time to add some more terms in there. But I think by limiting by date range, that's usually an easy decision to make. Is your case within a finite period of time, or is it ongoing where you have to keep collecting? And there are a couple different ways that you can also limit by custodians. Custodians, as you all know, are usually prioritized. You have those guys that you know up front are just going to be super important, and that's where all the documentation is going to be. Then you have the second level folks. Usually there's up to 3 levels of priorities that you're going to set for your custodians. And it's very important that you identify who those folks are. Because usually when you want to test your keywords and you want to see whether or not they're going to work, you're going to grab your most important person and put them through. And that's how you know whether or not that's going to work. There's also a couple different things. I know Nate talked about the certain file types and things like that you can call at the onset, but I'll tell you what, one of the things, and I know we haven't talked about this on the panel right as of yet, but smaller companies have the capability, because they are smaller, to have their folks self-collect. It's called targeted collection, and it is very important for small companies. Rather than go off onto the network with your little crawler or to take hard drives from people, what you can do is turn to all of the key players in your company, and you can say, I want you to find this material and put it on this place on the server. And you give them instructions on how to do that. And it really limits, because you are targeting only relevant information. Now, that's a good thing and a bad thing. Because remember the days when those of us that are old, all right, I'm old, and remember when we used to have to go out into warehouses and get the boxes and go through boxes to find the relevant information because we couldn't trust those folks to get their own stuff. Well, that question still comes up. Are they really going to give us everything in a targeted collection? Or are they going to try and hide things? Well, we always start off with believing that we are going to indeed get everything. And it limits the collection. We have had collections where we start off believing, using our 2.5 gig average per individual. That's usually what we collect from folks with their email and shared drive information. Per custodian is going to be 2.5 gig of email. And we have, with a targeted collection, turned it around to the point where it was less than a 0.5. So it's very important that if you're going to do that you put the processes in place to let folks do it, to give them the capability and the wherewithal and training to do it, and to track what they're doing and ask them to verify. Because it's all about defensibility.
One number I just want to throw out there, we just recently went through the data on our server. We're a Clearwell provider, which is a native review tool. And out of, we looked at about 50 cases, something for years. It was about 1 terabyte total. And out of that 1 terabyte, over the 50 cases, it averaged out to be about 3% of that was exported as responsive. The rest was non-responsive.
Another method or tool to use in terms of reducing your scope is deduplication. And I'm sure most of you have heard that term. There's also a new technology out that some people are using called near deduplication. Exact deduplication was pulling only documents that were identical duplicates out on in your electronic data. Near deduplication is now going out and finding very similar documents. So for example, let's say I have 5 different drafts of a contract, it would associate all of those together. And again, something that could be negotiated with the opposing party to reduce your scope up front. At some points you may decide that, yes, I do want to see all 5 iterations of that contract, but if it's not a contract dispute, that might not be the focus, and you can say, no, we can just look at 1 copy of that document.
You mentioned, Sue, self-collection. And self-collection does have a lot of benefits, but there are a lot of risks associated with it as well. You're asking basically the fox to guard the hen house. And you have a real issue with chain of custody. You have to make sure that the people who are doing the collection want to give everything and are trained, and you have to make sure it's auditable to make certain that if you're ever challenged as to whether or not everything was produced, you need to be able to say we've audited the self-collection of the individuals. So we do that for clients. We'll allow them, we'll give them the tools to do self-collection, and then we'll process the data. But for the most part, we want to make sure people understand the risk.